Yes, it was cold. That's why you always wear that to the party that you throw at your own house. Because it's awkward showing up naked at someone else's house. It's also awkward to answer your door naked. um, so when I was born, it was a surprise. Not that day. They figured it out by then. But, like several months before that, they were shocked that there was a baby coming because my parents were very young. It was completely unplanned. My father was like 19, and he was the second oldest in a fairly large family. And because of that, my uncle, when I was born, was 5 years old. There was less distance, less age between us than there was between him and my father. And because of that, he wasn't really my uncle in a lot of ways. He was like an older brother. The age difference was right, but also as like a little brother, I just idolized him, and I spent all of my time following him around. I wanted to do everything that he was doing. I was just fascinated by everything he did. And like an older brother, he despised me for that, and he tormented me, which is something that I've noticed amongst friends of mine that older brothers do. They torment their little brothers. The difference was my uncle was particularly talented at it. He was unusually patient for a child. He could just stand behind a corner in the house, perfectly still, waiting for me to walk by, at which point he would jump out and scare me. And I would, of course, get terrified and cry and run to my grandmother. After a while, he matured, and so did his torment. He stopped doing jump scares because that's kind of cheap. Instead, like I would be playing with my toys at my grandmother's, and I'd hear something. And so I'd stop and I'd look around, maybe go and have a quick look to see what it was, because the fear of him jumping out at me while I was looking for him was less than the fear of just waiting for it to happen. But I would never find him. And then I would come back and my toys would be different. Or maybe some of them were even missing. For a long time, for many, many years, I actually believed my grandmother's house was haunted, until I was just old enough to realize that my uncle was fucking with me. Fast forward, I'm in my mid-20s, and I'm up at my girlfriend's cottage, her stepmother's cottage, and it's Thanksgiving weekend. It's a tradition for them to go out to the local community center where all the church ladies get together and make a giant, Northern Ontario style Thanksgiving dinner to raise money for the community center or whatever they raise money for up there. And it's an amazing dinner. Those ladies know how to cook a turkey or 14, and more pie than you can shake a stick at, and no dishes, which is excellent. You don't have to clean anything up. There's just one problem with it. There's no leftovers. Like, seriously, how do you do Thanksgiving? How do you do a big turkey dinner and not have leftovers the next day? And my wife, she became my wife eventually. My wife and I were talking about this. We're like, kind of, don't want to be selfish or anything, but like, where are the sandwiches going to come from? And I realized that 2 hours away is my grandparents' cottage. And my family is there that weekend having Thanksgiving dinner. And I know there's going to be more than enough food for the two of us if we show up. So we make the decision the next day. We hop into the car. We drive 2 hours to my grandparents' cottage and show up, surprise them as they're sitting down to dinner. Of course, nobody minds. Everybody's thrilled that we're there, and absolutely, totally enough food for us. The only problem was there was nowhere for us to sleep. I wasn't too worried about this because I'm the kind of guy that always has a tent and 2 sleeping bags in the back of the car if I go on a road trip, because you never know what's going to happen. However, my wife doesn't really want to sleep in a tent, and I know that. But my little brother is up at the cottage with his friend Cindy. And my little brother is 12 years younger than me. I was 12 when he was born because, as we've already established, my parents know nothing about family planning. And so he's up there with his friend Cindy, and of course, he's like 14 or something, and they're just like thrilled. They're like, well, we'll stay in the tent, because it's cool when you're that age. So that was perfect. They stayed in the tent, and my wife and I stayed in the kids' room in the bunk beds. She was up on the top, and I was underneath, and there's a knock on the door, and my uncle stuck his face in, and he said, "Hey, do you want to go outside and pretend to be bears?" Immediately, my wife sticks her face over the edge of the mattress and says, "Well, you have to. It's your duty as an older brother." And that, of course, was very compelling because, you always want to do things that your girlfriend tells you to do when you're in love. But also, more importantly, this was the first time that my uncle had ever sort of invited me in to be on the other side of it. And I had to go along with him. So, get up, put my clothes on. Now, the tent was in a field in the back of the cottage. It's a small little clearing that we had. And so we went out the front of the cottage and walked in the opposite direction until we hit the lake. We didn't have any flashlights with us. We didn't speak a word. When we got to the lake, we turned left and we walked down to the neighbor's property. When we got there, we walked back towards the access road that went behind all of the cottages. And when we got to the access road, still hadn't said a word, we stopped. My uncle grabbed a stick and he snapped it. And in the moment that he snapped it, you could hear all the commotion in the tent go silent. You hear a little bit of whispering, which was probably something along the lines of, "What was that? Did you hear anything?" And we just sat and waited. We did nothing. We waited until the sound that they heard just faded into the memory of a sound that they think maybe they heard. And then eventually, they started talking again. And as they started talking, we were free to make our way down the road, getting closer and closer. Every once in a while stopping, snapping another branch, waiting for them to start talking again. Until eventually we're directly in line with the tent, and the cottage was beyond that. And the only thing between us and them was enough forest to make you wonder what is out there. So we went and we started making our way through the forest, getting closer and closer and closer to the tent, until the tent was about as far away as the bar is right now. And we stopped again, and my uncle looked at me, and he made the sound. I think this is like part of the genius of him, because if I were to tell any of you to make a sound like a bear, no offense, but you're going to make a sound of a human trying to sound like a bear. He didn't try to sound like a bear. I would describe it as sounding like a very large pig. It's perfect because you don't know what it is, but you know it's big, and you know you shouldn't be hearing it. And as soon as he made that sound, not only did the tent go silent, but the flashlights went off, so we couldn't see their silhouettes against the wall of the tent. And they were terrified. And my uncle started to move off to the left, and I started to move off to the right, and I started to make the sound also. So now there was two of us out there. And we slowly started to work our way around the tent. And now they're like not quiet anymore. Now they're actually freaking out, and they're screaming like a couple of teenage kids. And as we get around and we're on opposite sides of the tent, ready to come in towards them, I hear the most incredible thing I've ever heard in my life. My brother's friend Cindy says, "Fuck this. If I'm gonna die, I'm gonna see what gets me." And she turns the flashlight on and she starts to undo the zipper of the tent. And I realize, oh, she's gonna see who we are in like 10 seconds. And my uncle has the same thought. And so we just run directly at the tent, screaming as loud as we can, forcing them to scream into a panic until eventually we're all just screaming together. And they realize that it's just the two of us screwing with them. And we're all sitting there laughing, and it's fun, and the two of them were good about it, and they understood that it was a joke, and it was a prank, and it was fun being on the other side of it. But I realized that that wasn't the kind of older brother I wanted to be, because I remembered what it felt like. And so I never treated my brother like that ever again. But if you find yourself camping up north, and if you're being an asshole to all the people at the sites around you, you better pray I'm not one of those people. Thank you very much.